Hello, boys and girls, back again to read you another story. And today, because it's almost Easter time, I would like to read you a story about my favorite bunny, and his name is Peter. Peter was a brother. He had other rabbits in his family, and his mother had asked him to do something, and he was not a very good listener. So I want you to listen close today to my story and find out what Peter did that he should not have done. When I was a little girl, my mom used to read me this story, and I loved it. I just thought it was one of the best stories ever. And so it is called The Tale of Peter Rabbit, and it's by Beatrice Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits. Their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. So do you see those 4 little bunnies? They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dear," said Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the field or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there, and he was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Okay, she used a word there, mischief. What do you think that means? If I said don't get into mischief. If you said trouble, you were exactly right. She did not want her children to get into trouble while she was gone. Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, listened to her, and they went out and they picked blackberries. But Peter, who was a very naughty bunny, did not listen, and he went straight into Mr. McGregor's garden. Is that a good idea? I don't think so. First, he ate some lettuce. So there he is. First, he ate some lettuce, then he ate some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then he was feeling kind of sick. So he went to look for some parsley because that would make his tummy feel a little bit better. But around at the end of the cucumbers, who should he see but Mr. McGregor? And he was down on his hands and knees working in the garden. Mr. McGregor was working with the cabbages, and he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief, stop!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed around the garden, for he had forgotten his way back to the gate. He had lost one shoe while he was running, and one among the cabbages, and the other one among the potatoes. So now he has no shoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I might think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by his large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, and it was quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost. So there's Peter, and there's his jacket, and he got caught. Look at that. He must feel very scared. Peter gave himself for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by friendly sparrows, who flew over to him with great excitement and implored him to help himself get out. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to plop on top of Peter, but Peter wiggled out in time, leaving his jacket behind. And he rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. So there's Peter jumping into the can, and it's all filled with water. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking underneath each. Presently, Peter sneezed. Ka-choo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of the window, upsetting 3 plants on the windowsill. And the window was way too small for Mr. McGregor to climb through. So he was tired of running after Peter, and he decided he'd just go back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not the least idea what the way was out. He didn't know how to get out now. He was stuck in Mr. McGregor's garden. After a time, he began to wander about. He found a door to a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a little rabbit in there. An old mouse was running in and out of the stone step, but with peas and beans to her family. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth, she could not answer him. So she only shook her head, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still. So there's the cat, and she's looking at the goldfish. And Peter thought it was best not to bother her, so he kept moving. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Roosh, roosh, scratch, scratch, scratch. So who do you think that is in the garden with a hoe? You're right, probably Mr. McGregor. Peter scurried underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeked over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. So Peter has to go past Mr. McGregor to get out of the gate. How many think that's a good idea? I don't think so either. Peter got down very quietly out of the wheelbarrow, and he started running as fast as he could to go straight down the walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him from the corner of his eye. So there's Peter, and there's Mr. McGregor. But Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods behind the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up this little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten away the blackbirds. So now he doesn't have his shoes and he doesn't have his jacket. Peter never stopped running or looking behind him until he got home to his big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. What is a fortnight? That's a good question. We're going to come back to that. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea, and she gave him a dose. And then she had 1 spoonful was to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. So they had a nice little dinner while poor Peter had to go to bed because he was not feeling very good. So I want to ask you a question. What did Peter do that caused him to get sick? That's right, he didn't listen to his mom. If he had listened to his mom, he would have been fine. He would have had blackberries and he would have been with his brothers and sisters and he would have done fine. So it's very important that we're good listeners for our family. But the reason I like this story is because we all make mistakes. We all do things we shouldn't do sometimes. And you know what? As long as we learn from our mistakes, it's okay. We just need to learn and try not to do it again the next time. So making a mistake is not necessarily a terrible thing. We just need to make it right. So remember the song that we used to sing in class that about anyone can make a mistake? Let's sing that song. Anyone can make a mistake. Nobody's perfect day and night. So it's okay to make a mistake, but be sure to say the words that make it right. Like, I'm sorry, and please, And thank you, it won't happen again. And so, boys and girls, when we do make mistakes, just remember to always tell the truth. Talk to your parents and try not to be like Peter Rabbit. Try not to disobey our parents, because you know what? Our parents are looking out for the best for us, and they love us so much. Just like I love you so much. And I hope you have a great Easter, and I will see you soon.